Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about The Blue Sword by Robin McKinley. And alright, this is one of those books that I'm almost shocked that I didn't read it in high school. This was totally in my wheelhouse, but somehow I never picked up Robin McKinley at all. And when classic female fantasy authors came up recently on a thread on Threads, her name was everywhere. So I was like, okay, it's time. And oh my god, this is exactly the kind of fantasy that is candy to me. The Blue Sword is the story of Harry Crewe, a young woman who has recently moved out to the colonial border in Daria from her family estate in Homeland. Her father just died, and that leaves her brother as her only living relation. Seeing as he is stationed out in the middle of nowhere, the only real option they have is for Harry to live with this kindly couple in this small border town. Harry does not mind too much because she finds herself strangely drawn to the desert and spends hours staring out at the hills where the hill folk live. But when Corlaf, the king of the hill folk, rides into town for a meeting with the Homelanders, her life will change forever. You see, the hill folk have magic. Strange, uncontrollable powers that seem to almost act through them. And Corlaf has significantly more magic than most. When his magic tells him that he needs to take Harry with them, he has little option but to do so. Soon, both of them are drawn into a fate neither of them fully understand, and all they can do is keep moving and do what they can, what only they can, in the desperate fight to save the hill folk and all the people who live in Daria from the evil and inhuman horde of northerners threatening to spill through the mountains. So yeah, from page one, the thing that kept making me smile about this book was how clearly this fits in with all my favorite fantasy books from the 90s. Like, yes, this book made me feel like I was sitting on the porch of my childhood home, reading during summer break, with the smell of jasmine and honeysuckle in my nose, the buzz of mosquitoes in my ear, and the nice summer breeze carrying my dreams for the future out into the world. And I would have loved it for that reason alone. But it's also just roundly a good book. The prose is uniformly lovely, to the point that I did not pick out very many lines as like good ones to share with the world, because I could have highlighted every line as a great line. The writing is just lyrical enough to give the lovely mythological tone while being perfectly readable. There are a lot of phrases in a presumably made-up language here, and they sound natural and real enough to my ear that I found myself searching for some of them online to see if the author was using a real language. But also, I really appreciated the way that these words are introduced to us, because a lot of times when fantasy books have a lot of world-specific language, it feels like word salad, at very least at the beginning of the book, and quite often straight through to the end of the book. I'm still going, I'm not sure what that word means. So often the authors introduce us to dozens of new words immediately, and either don't define them at all, trusting context clues or a glossary to help the reader figure out what is actually going on, or they define it once and move on, trusting us to remember, which is fine if it's an occasional word, but when it's dozens of new words per chapter, I can never keep them straight, which makes it hard to understand what's going on, hard to connect to the characters, and hard to feel that the world is real. But this one feeds us only a couple of words at a time, using them interchangeably with English for chapters and chapters until it's cemented enough in the reader's head that I had no trouble remembering that Zotar was a big fancy tent, that Sornin means sun gold, and that Malak was a tea-like drink. We get some words that are thrown at us with a brief description and never appear, but because they never come up again, we don't really need to remember them. They're just sort of color for the world. And some are never fully defined, but we are given enough description and world building around them that we don't need to know exactly what they mean to get the drift of what's going on. It ends up feeling like we are naturally learning a language, And yes, something that helps this effect is the fact that Harry, our main character, our POV character, or one of the main POV characters, is literally learning the language herself, but that shows you that sometimes the best way to introduce this kind of complex language is to have a character that is learning it themselves, and that applies for more than just language world building. World building in general is a lot easier when you have a character who does not know the world that is being introduced to it. But overall, this is just a masterful example of how to use language as world building, to give us the feeling of where we are and how this world differs from ours just by introducing us to new words. This added both to the beauty of the prose and it adds to the feeling of almost floating throughout the book. This book feels almost dreamlike a lot of the time, which fits the story perfectly. And another thing that adds to that feeling of dreamlikeness is the fact that yes, this book head hops constantly and consistently enough that you would never think it to be a mistake. We get peeks inside all the main characters' heads, several minor characters, and occasionally the animals' minds. Hell, there's even a brief moment when we peek inside the mind of the wind. And I love that. It gives this sort of floating feeling that is just magical. It's somewhere between omniscient third person and limited third person, and it's something so much writing advice nowadays tells you to never do. And this book shows that no, when done well, it gives you both the deep emotional connection to the characters that you get from a close, limited third-person POV, and the broad overview you get from omniscient third-person POV. It can do great things when handled well. But also, it's almost necessary for this book because most of our main characters are a bit reticent. They don't talk much, and they don't really share their feelings a lot. Which I will admit that the one moment when they do just start deeply sharing their feelings in beautiful lyrical prose, it felt a little bit forced. But overall, I personally love characters that aren't big on sharing emotions. It gives a lot more power to the few words they do say. But this reticence would mean that if we did stay in one or two POVs, readers would have struggled to connect to a lot of the small side characters. And seeing even a brief moment into their thoughts allowed us to build rapport and empathy with them without spending a lot of time with them, which is part of what made this book feel very understanding of differences between peoples and very kind. Also, the ability to know more than one person actually should, it is part of the narrative. It comes into play in the plot line. It is an active part of the world building. And there are multiple times when characters see things happening elsewhere, know what someone is thinking, or even see the future. So the head hopping begins to feel like an extension of this ability. And then there's the theme of blending of identity, which makes the POV even more thematically relevant. That theme was one of the things I found most fascinating about this book. It's in the fact that our main character ends up in a position to bridge two cultures, but also in the characters from legends guiding our modern characters. Animals and objects have enough identity that it both blends with and remains separated from the human characters they are attached to. And the magic here, which is called Kalar, is something that is both intrinsic to some characters, is somewhat in their control, but also is something that seems almost sentient on its own. It is a force that drives them, that controls them. It sometimes makes them do things they would not have done on their own, to the point that sometimes it seems to be almost puppeting our characters. And then you add in all the stuff about inheritance of what, for lack of a better phrase, I'm gonna call cultural personality traits, and overall it creates this fascinating examination of how much of who we are do we actually control? Are fate and free will antithesis to each other? And how being in a position of power, being in a position where you should have the most ability to shape the world around you, often leaves you feeling like you have no agency whatsoever. And how that moment when you do suddenly have all the options open up before you can feel like the ground dropped out from beneath you and you have no options whatsoever. And of course, most of that is in the character of Harry, who I just absolutely love. Like, she ends up having, I think, 6 different names / titles throughout the story, and it helps represent this chaotic mixing of identities inside of her. But beyond that, I loved how stoic of a character she is. She goes through a lot of shit that most authors would have her freaking out about. And she's just surprisingly calm and thoughtful and open to the experiences. She's prone to assuming the best of everyone, and she does not easily panic when they do unexpected things. And yes, she definitely does have big emotions, some of them quite dramatic, but she rolls with most of what happens in this book in an absolutely glorious way. And one of the reasons I really loved this is because it's a direct contrast to what I was afraid might be happening when I was about 2 chapters in. Because about 2 chapters into this book, I was looking at it all worried like and going, oh my god, am I going to have to do a review about how everyone's favorite author wrote this really problematic dated book? Because, yeah, the first couple of chapters, this book was giving me really strong The Sheik vibes. Which, if you don't know, The Sheik was a wildly popular romance novel from 1919 about a white woman being kidnapped by and assaulted by a Middle Eastern sheik who she then falls in love with. It's more than a little bit racist, it's pretty misogynistic, it's problematic as hell. And here in this book, we have a pale-skinned blonde woman being kidnapped by a man from over the desert who is the leader of a heavily Asian-coded culture. But Harry is not the shrinking violet swooning into the arms of the man who takes whatever he wants from her. No, she's a strong, stoic, curious, and open-minded woman who becomes a warrior. And the Hillfolk are never presented as barbaric or primitive. None of them try to take advantage of Harry, and she ends up feeling more comfortable in their society than the one she grew up in. And yes, there is still colonialism going on here. The Homelanders invaded this land, and there is not that much pushback against their presence here. The Homelanders, the people that we meet, some of them are clearly seeing the locals as somehow lesser. The locals are, a lot of times, their servants, and there is definitely racism going on there that is subtly put in, but the book is also very clear that the two cultures are different, but not inferior or superior to each other. Homeland has numbers, perseverance, and some technology that the Hillfolk don't have, and the Hillfolk have skills, knowledge, and magic that the Homelanders don't. And also, there are different ways that each culture seems more similar to what we would consider modern, egalitarian culture. And I was just really honestly impressed with the balance of the two cultures here. But I also want to talk about the animal characters here. There are 2 pretty major characters that are animals, and I think this book does the perfect job of walking the line between giving them personalities but not personifying them. Like, sometimes in fantasy you do have magically sentient animals. Like, that's fine. Sometimes you have a human-level intelligence unicorn, or an extra intelligent dragon who's more intelligent than the humans around them. Cool, whatever, I don't care. Even if you want to have a horse that talks and, thinks like a person. Cool, I'm 100% behind it. But other times, you'll read a book where there's no indication whatsoever that these animals are supposed to be in any way different than their counterpart in our real world, but somehow they still read like humans. And that does start to feel like an error, not a choice. And these animal characters are not that. They are just a horse and a cat that are smart and full of personality, but in a way that reads like real animals. They clearly like and dislike certain things. They clearly have their own desires and their own thought patterns, but they aren't like conveying complex philosophical concepts with a flick of an ear or something like that. And I loved them! The bond they formed with Harry feels very real, very relatable, and enviable. Like, I want that cat and that horse friend. And it just really perfectly, to me, captures that bond between humans and animals. But as always, there are a few things that I was less fond of. Mainly in this case, the action scenes. There are a few training fights, a few one-on-one fights, a battle, and they all felt very skimmed over to me. Like, we barely see any of the fighting at all. And what we do see is the kind of action where 6 hours of fighting is compacted into like 1 paragraph. And for some of it, it works. There is that feeling of there's so much going on that it's hard to document what's going on and you're sort of outside yourself, and that bit really works for me. But especially in the early training sessions, I personally would have appreciated just a little bit more clearly painted action. I wanted to know what kind of fighting was happening here, and I did not get that. Now, this is something that I feel like is very much a personal tastes thing. Like, I know there are plenty of people who just don't want to read long fight scenes or long battle scenes. But in my personal opinion, the downside of skimming those, especially when the main climax of the book is a battle, it ends up feeling a little bit anticlimactic. And I just really would have liked more time seeing the desperate fight so that the win could feel a little bit more earned. And related to that, the antagonist of the book really just feels like a cardboard cutout of bad so that the characters have something to fight. There feels like almost no lore behind the Northerners at all, other than that they are from the North, inhuman, and evil. Like, they are an existential threat to everyone in the book, and they feel like a looming shadow and nothing else. And to an extent, I get it. This is a pretty short book, and it's one that is significantly more focused on Harry and Corlath's emotional journey than anything else, but giving them a fully fleshed out enemy would have made this slightly stronger, in my opinion. And it's even to the point that when we see the evil army, the book says the characters struggle to see what makes these creatures inhuman, just that they are inhuman, and I'm like, okay, you really couldn't come up with a description that you liked, could ya? And that sort of is a core trope of fantasy, the big bad who all they are is bad, but I just wanted a hair more from it. Overall, though, this book is absolutely lovely. It felt magical and mythical and like home all at once. The writing is lovely. The characters are interesting. I loved what it is doing with identity, fate, and agency. It's got a romance that is just barely there. It's got a truly impressive balance of hope and despair, and it was doing some really impressive things with that feeling that there is no way we can win, but fighting is our only option, without feeling heavy. Overall, I love this one and cannot wait to read more by Robin McKinley. I'm sort of sad I didn't find her sooner.